it was important for me to convey to my future readers that they are their own home, because that's ultimately what I've learned. It's not that Dominican Republic is my home or any other country, it's that I am my home. And through my ups and downs, through the very many rejections that I've received so far, it's just through everyday life that we are truly. And I know it sounds even like cliche, but that's what I learned. And that's what I wanted to convey, that we are our home.
Nicole Jorge is a Dominican writer and educator who explores the intersection of creativity and identity. Writing in her second language, she examines cultural identity and the universal search for belonging. Her debut middle grade novel, Me, Myself, and the Messy Misunderstanding, is currently out on submission, and she is also at work on 2 verse projects for young readers. She is a member of Quill and Cup, an international women's writing community, and has led workshops on epistolary novels, creating layered, complex characters. She lives in Santo Domingo, where she shares her writing journey through her newsletter and blog, Stories from Home.
The characters I write about are characters who are complicated because they are a walking contradiction. And maybe at some point, like me, and like I'm sure many other Dominicans, they've had to learn or maybe transform the lens through which they appreciate their country.
In this episode, we discuss what it really means to find home in your own story. We explore claiming the title of writer, navigating life between languages and cultures, embracing identity and belonging, and how community can help us move through rejection, self-doubt, and the creative journey. Whether you're a writer, a creative, or someone trying to find your place in the world, I think you'll find something that resonates. Nicole, welcome to the show. So excited to have you with us this evening.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
So, can you start by telling us a little bit about your journey? How did your journey as a writer start? And also, when did you realize that storytelling was something you were passionate about?
I think my journey as a writer has gone from Nicole who loves to write to Nicole who finally calls herself a writer. I've always known that I love to write since grade school. I wrote stories. I think that even when I was taking like tests, I would write stories on the back of the pages. At home, I would fill notebooks with poems or stories, anything that involved the act of writing, I knew I loved. It wasn't until the pandemic, though, during lockdown, that I started writing a book that, like the idea that I had in my heart, I had had that idea for about a year. But it took about 2 years after that book was actually completed, when I joined my writing community, that I think I finally accepted that title. Like, yes, I am a writer.
Wow. I tell you, that's amazing. So you are Nicole who writes, and then
Mhm.
you became Nicole the writer. It's so interesting how the pandemic just shaped it shaped our experiences. We can attribute a lot to the pandemic, but you finished your book. It took you 1 year, but it took you 2 years later. Why the delay? Why did it take 2 years?
Oh, for sure, imposter syndrome.
Ah.
I always, and that has a lot to do with what I write about. So I think it's beautiful now that I can see it in hindsight, because it's all like a tangled mess of life. Um, but I write in English, and English is not my first language. So I learned how to read and write in English first. And so because I love stories, the language that I was introduced to stories to was English, but my first language is Spanish. And so in my mind, there's always been this battle between the language of my family, the language of my heritage, the language of my culture, and then the language that I've chosen to write in.
Mhm.
And so even when I had written a book, even when I had so many ideas that I wanted to write about, and I was following my writing process, I belonged to a writing community. I didn't think that I didn't think that I could actually call myself a writer, because I felt like a fraud.
Felt like a fraud. But when you felt like a fraud, when you had that feeling, was that tied to the body of work, but you as a person navigating your cultural heritage and the language? I guess, was it
I
craft versus?
I'm not sure, to be honest. It's more like I everything I write is always tied back to the Dominican Republic. I know that. And I love to write about my country. And
Mhm.
so in the back of my mind, it's always been, well, why are you writing about the Dominican Republic? in English.
Hmm. Hmm.
And in fact, I once I wrote on an Instagram story once that I felt that everything I write is a love-hate conversation between me and the Dominican Republic. And because I've learned how to fall in love again with my country, and I'm so proud to call myself a Dominican. But at that same time, there's always this little voice nagging in the back of my head that says, well, if you love it so much, why not write in Spanish?
Ah,
And also because I guess that I want everyone to fall in love with the Dominican Republic as much as I have. And again, if I'm doing it, the language is a big part of it.
hmm. Hmm. That makes sense. So I'm going to ask you the question that you asked yourself. And I think I may know the answer, but why did you write in English? Why did you choose English first as opposed to Spanish and then translation to English?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I've always written more in English than I ever have in Spanish.
Hmm.
I went to a school that had an all-American curriculum. I left that school in ninth grade, and everything I wrote was in English. I took Spanish not as a second language, but it was not the focus of the curriculum. When I moved abroad to Colombia, when I was 14 to like 10th grade, and there that was the first time when I was forced to actually write in Spanish, like full length. And then when I returned and I went to college, again, I had to write in Spanish. And every time I wrote in Spanish, whether it was an article, an essay, whatever it was, it always felt forced and awkward. Um, and I felt like I was stepping outside of myself, outside of my head to make it sound right. And then when I'm writing in English, it just flows.
Sounds like your comfort level was in English, and even though you speak Spanish and you live in the Dominican
Yeah.
Republic, you also wanted to make sure that the language barrier wasn't there and you could reach more people, which goes back to the love-hate relationship you have with the Dominican Republic. Tell us more
Absolutely.
about the love-hate relationship and why your books center around the DR.
Um, I think that
Mhm.
growing up, I always had this expectation of what being a true Dominican woman would have, what it should have looked like, or who I should have represented. And to be honest, I can't look back and actually pinpoint what I thought that was. I just knew that it was like black and white. There was no in between. And I feel like it has to do a lot with I feel it has to do a lot with Dominicans. Like this is our identity. There's and maybe I don't want to say that this is just me. I truly believe that this is something that we struggle with as a country. I just don't want to generalize it. And because I'm not speaking for all Dominicans, but I do feel that we tend to be proud of being Dominican when we leave the country. But once we're here, we're always nagging about it, putting it down. It's just, I don't know. I grew up watching that. I grew up seeing it firsthand. And so I had to relearn how to love everything about the DR.
It's beautiful. How does your body of work change or shape the narrative? Because you mentioned there was the black and white, and it sounds like the messy middle, as some call it, or the gray areas weren't represented. How does your work represent that area that's often overlooked or unseen?
I think that that gray area, that's exactly what I don't want to call it. I want to call it that colorful area.
Oh, I love
As
that.
because Dominicans are so colorful. And so I feel that maybe what I thought before was that it had to be muted. And so what I've learned now, or what I think that I'm trying to put into practice through what I write, is that it doesn't have to be muted. It doesn't have to be a gray area. It can be loud and bold and colorful, and that's equally beautiful. And so the characters I write about are characters who are complicated because they are a walking contradiction. And maybe at some point, like me, and like I'm sure many other Dominicans, they've had to learn or maybe transform the lens through which they appreciate their country.
Mm. Tell us about your first body of work and some of the characters that you felt closest to as you were creating that work, your writing.
Me, Myself, and the Messy Misunderstanding is an epistolary novel. So it's between Lucy, who is a Dominican girl who travels to the States because her father just found a job there teaching at a local university. And she corresponds with Peter, who is an American boy who has lived in the DR for a while now, for a few months, because his dad is a baseball coach. And in their conversations, Lucy realizes that everything she thought about herself was challenged when she moved to the States. And Peter realizes that when he moves to the DR, it's like he has this relationship with baseball that is kind of like the relationship I have with baseball. It's everything that he could have hoped for, but he learns like to peel back the layers of what it truly means for a Dominican, what baseball truly means for the DR.
And how did you come up with the plot for this particular story?
Um, when I left the corporate world, so I used to work in corporate communications, and I want to say that I was good at it, but I wasn't passionate about it. So I really wanted to get into education. And when I started working at a small high school, at a small school in Santo Domingo, my principal, and we were having a conversation, and she said something along the lines of, I don't want my school to be like many other schools where Dominicans aren't taught to love the Dominican Republic. Like, yes, we're teaching them to read and write, and I really want them to be bilingual, but I don't ever want them to not know their own country. And that just hit me like the ice bucket challenge, because that's how I had felt for so long. And it was there in that conversation that I realized why everything in my mind felt so off about my own identity. And so she said something that just clicked, and she said, I can't imagine what it would be like for one of these students who feel so American to go to the States and realize that just because they love a lot of the things of American culture, that doesn't mean they're American.
Mm.
And so it that was one conversation, and it stayed. And I kept revisiting and revisiting until finally I I just started writing.
Mm-hmm. That was powerful. Absolutely powerful. And it's interesting how we can have conversations with others and then we see the need to close or fill the gap, and it just sits with
Mhm.
us until we take action.
Yeah, definitely. That's why I feel like I find stories, and I that's why I'm a storyteller, because I can find stories in the most mundane things. It's just I can sit at a coffee shop and someone will bring a bag with whatever and just hand it to someone else. And although I'm there in the moment, in the back of my mind, I'm trying to make that a story. I don't know why. It's always been like that. Like the littlest things and conversations that I've had, conversations that maybe I hear in passing, like even at a wall. I just try to make everything a story.
Mm-hmm. That's powerful because you're a storyteller. And it sounds like that's so much a part of who you are. What did you learn about yourself as you were writing your first book? What is one thing that you learned about yourself?
That I can write a book.
It's true too.
Here's why though. It's because for so long, and I truly remember, like I remember the people I had conversations with. I remember it was probably like my 31st birthday. I said by the time I turned 35, just I had always said like I want to write a book. I want to become a published author. Um, I just, for so long, I talked about it and I talked about it, but I wasn't doing anything about it. And so then when I finally typed the end, that's what I learned, that I can do it.
Yeah. I have to ask you, what was the impetus to just get started? Because we hear things all the time. We observe. And as you said, you observe and it becomes a story. But what made you put pen to paper or sit down at the typewriter and just begin the body of work?
Um, I'm pretty sure it was like a string of things.
Hmm.
But at that time, I remember that my sister, my middle sister, she gave me a gift. And it was like a coaching session with a good friend of hers. And in that coaching session, which that coach is one of like herself, her persona inspired a character in the story. I I I did the same thing with her. I would tell her how much I wanted to write a book, how much I wanted to become a writer. And she asked me, so why don't you just do it? What are you waiting for? And I normally have answers for a lot of things, but I couldn't respond to that because it was lockdown. We weren't doing anything. And so there was absolutely nothing in the way of me sitting down and writing the story.
Hmm. No excuses, but I love the fact that a coach was able to pull that out of
Yeah,
you, like that awareness. Yeah. It just goes to show how powerful coaching or having someone to work with
absolutely.
opens the door to us moving forward. Tell us about the most significant thing. I know you've been working on that. Is that a finished manual?
Yes, the most significant thing has since been renamed Chat Finds Her Call. It's a story in verse for a much younger audience than I normally write. So it's for early readers, ages like 4 through 8. And I I think I'm really proud of it because again, I'm just mesmerized by the fact that we can convey so much with such a little amount of words. But also it's an ode to my writing community, and so it's extra special because truly, I wasn't kidding when I said earlier that there would be no writer journey for me had it not been for them.
And why the decision to create work for early readers?
Because I guess that there's always this little idea that maybe, just maybe, had I had someone when I was a lot younger, like infuse that belief in like in younger Nicole, you can do this, become a writer. Um, you've got this. I want to believe that had that been a possibility for me, maybe I wouldn't have stalled for so long.
Mm.
And so I I wanted to write a story for younger readers so that whatever it is, whatever creative um, endeavor it is that they want to pursue, if they believe in themselves, if they're surrounded by the right people, then they can do it.
You've worked on multiple projects. How do you approach the creative process for such different age groups and formats?
I think I'm a mood writer.
Tell me more. What does that mean?
I guess I'm in the mood. No, this is what I mean. When I started writing The Faceless Doll, I was teaching ninth and 10th language arts. And so I was teaching the long way down. And I remember I gave the book to a student who I had already taught. So I wasn't teaching her the book. She was not in my class anymore. Um, but I gave her the book. It was probably like the morning. And she came back to me the next day and she was just like, wow, Miss Nicole, this book, it was amazing. And I said, I know, right? Because I had had that same experience. I couldn't put it down. Um, and so then I was just like, it became an obsession. I wanted to read all the novels in verse I could.
Oh, wow.
And so I guess what I mean by that is that there was this moment when I realized this is I love it. I love that you can say so much with so little. I love that you can play with like the rhythm and the language. Um, and so I guess that what I'm trying to say is that between me, myself, and the messy misunderstanding, where I was writing letters and trying to hop from Lucy to Peter, and the faceless doll, where I was writing in verse, I just try to immerse myself um, as much as I can, both in format but also in setting. And so, yes, I know that all of my stories, I think for now, will always take place in the Dominican Republic.
Hmm.
But it's a tiny island, or but we're so vast. We have the mountains and we have the rivers and the beaches and the sand dunes. There's so much, and I love road trips. So every time I can, especially when I'm beginning a project, that's my excuse. I tell my husband we need to go on a road trip because I need to like explore this space, and I take a lot of pictures. And then when I come back home, I ground myself in those pictures and I start writing.
Oh, okay then. So what I'm hearing, if I understand correctly, I'm hearing that your approach for both books was really your environment, taking pictures,
Yeah,
absorbing, and then tackling it in that way.
I think that always comes first. I know that I have some writer friends who, and just in general, people say like I start with character or I start with plot. I start with setting.
You start with setting, and that ties back to taking pictures and really
Yeah.
absorbing and observing your environment. Wow, that's powerful. How do you do? But do you write by the seat of your pants? Do you have a dedicated writing desk? What does that look like for you? Because you work full time as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, how do you balance like, and how do you end up taking, the pictures and the environment and grounding it into a body of work?
Although I'm trying to like have the most consistent writing routine as possible. If I say that I have that, I'd be lying. I That's not true. It hasn't happened for anything that I've written so far, especially because I don't know, since I decided to call myself a writer, life has been lifing. Um, and so what I do recognize is when I have that impulse, like when I realize that the story is flowing, I tap into that and I write as much as I can, not to burn out, but because I know that I can make significant progress. And then I'm a teacher, so I know that I have summer break and I have longer hours that I can play with. And so I work around that. It doesn't mean that I don't write through like the school year, but it does mean that I write a lot less, for sure.
Hmm. Hmm. Do you believe in writer's block?
I did it before, and I remember I had a student who I adore. She's graduated now. She was facing that in my class, and I told her there's no such thing, Alina, as a writer block, as writer's block. That's what I told her. And I guess I can publicly say, Alina, I was wrong. I was so wrong because I faced it after. Um, and especially when life throws things at you, it's hard. It's hard to maintain oneself like in a creative headspace. There was a moment this past year where there was absolutely no creative output. And I guess that when when the rough waters start calming down, like yes, it has returned to me. And I've since started working on a new project, but there was definitely block.
Hmm. Hmm. How do you manage to move through those blocks as they've come to you, whether they come in waves? I do believe in ebbs and flows, and
Mhm.
absolutely life really will direct things your way, especially when you stand up and claim something. It seems like everything just yeah, flows your way. How did you balance it all? Because I know you have a lot on your plate and still you continue to produce work.
I think that it's because of my writing community or the writing community that I belong to, Colin Cup, because it's just this beautiful balance of craft, but also mindset. And there are so many things that, in my case, with those ebbs and flows, it's more about mindset. And then when I'm actually outpouring, all the words are coming, I can rely on craft. But when I struggle to write even 500 words and I feel like a failure and I feel like this like the last thing I wrote is the last thing I'll ever write. I need that mindset. Like and I rely on community to just reminds me that it's normal that we all go through it and that when we're actually when we're in this together, even though it's like it's a solitary endeavor, but not so much, it makes it much more manageable.
Mhm. Community is so important.
Yeah.
It sounds as if it was just an integral part of your evolution as a writer, and even to claim yourself as a writer.
There would be, and I truly believe this, there would be no journey of myself as a writer without Pull and Cup.
Really?
None.
Wow, it's powerful. I really want to make sure our listeners understand the work that you're producing. We know that it's shaped by your environment, but you also delve into identity and belonging. Can you tell me a little bit more, tell us a little bit more about what that means?
Um, well, I think I've shared before everything about like my difficult relationship with my cultural identity. Because of all of that, I've always struggled with belonging. And so I feel like rather than me saying, oh, I realize that I want to write about these topics, I feel like these topics, and it was not consciously, they found me. So like throughout everything that I've experienced, um, and things that as a teacher I also experienced. So for it's and I know it's very common throughout the world, but in the DR there are many schools that heavily rely on an international curriculum. And so I love that, for example, right now I work at a school where there is an intentional approach to make sure that the students learn about the Dominican Republic and that they feel that pride. But that's not always the case. And so it's that I guess it's that realization and that awareness maybe that I have now as an adult that I want to write about these topics because I want to make sure that maybe it's not only in the Dominican Republic, maybe it's other countries that have students who feel that they want to be something else rather than their own nationality. I write to them. I don't want them to feel that way because otherwise you're going to end up struggling to really believe in who you are because you don't know who you are.
That's so powerful, Nicole. It sounds like there's this duality of
Mhm.
trying to fit in where you are, yet not accepting who you are in that given environment because of outside influences or projection of others.
Yes, absolutely.
But your body of work grounds identity for so many. And it sounds like that also helped you with loving being a part of the Dominican Republic. Yeah. When you think about the messaging in your work, and I know we focus a lot on the Dominican Republic, but I'm sure there's a universal message. What would you say that universal message is?
I'm going to borrow this from a fourth grader. So at the end of each year, I always have my students do like an end of year reflection. And for the past few years, I center everything we learn around a big concept and then an essential question. And this year, my fourth graders learned about conflict, and they learned about like their essential question was, what does conflict teach you about who you are? And this mighty fourth grader wrote that next time, and that he knows that this is going to happen, that next time he faces a problem, he has to believe in himself, not fight himself. And I could not believe this. Not because he was a fourth grader. It's just it was such a beautiful way to sort of like tie like bow tie his own experience this year. He struggled a lot. And so for him to have said that he needs to learn not to fight himself, but to believe in himself, that just it really resonated. And I think that at the end of the day, or at least I want to believe that that's also what I write about. I write about characters who, for some reason, are fighting themselves, and rather than fighting who they are, they need to believe in themselves.
Absolutely powerful. It's absolutely powerful. Did you say that's from a fourth grader?
Yeah, that's a fourth grader. I took a picture because I need to keep that. It's just I cried.
That's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. And to learn at such a young age,
Mm-hmm.
right? This
Yeah.
concept of believing in yourself and not fighting with yourself, that goes a long way. Who are some of the writers or creators who inspire you? And how do they influence your own work?
I mentioned to Jason Reynolds, and
Hmm.
I truly I can't begin to explain how I feel when I read his work, and how I feel that I want to dissect it, but not in a way like we're going to dissect everything and try to figure out its meaning. Um it's just in my mind it's like, wow, how do you play with words, and it seems so effortless, but I know it's probably not, and then create this meaning um that is so impactful for myself as an adult, but also for the students that read his work, like across all age groups. And then I also want to say that I feel very inspired by Dominican composers that play merengue or that they write merengue songs. And for example, in The Faceless Doll, I wouldn't ever play it as I was writing because I need silence. But before I was writing, I wanted to think in the back of my mind that I was playing with words like Jason Reynolds, but I was infusing the meaning and the rhythm of merengue composers.
Oh, wow. I want to talk a little bit about your blog and newsletter. So, through your blog and newsletter, Stories from Home, you share your journey. How important is it for you to document this process, and what impact do you hope to have?
Unfortunately, this past year, I haven't really been updating as much. But I
Mhm.
guess that when I started writing stories from home, it was important for me to convey to my future readers that they are their own home, because that's ultimately what I've learned. It's not that Dominican Republic is my home or any other country, it's that I am my home. And through my ups and downs, through the very many rejections that I've received so far, it's just through everyday life that we are truly. And I know it sounds even like cliche, but that's what I learned. And that's what I wanted to convey, that we are our home. We need to take care of ourselves. We need to make sure that we're working hard towards achieving our dreams, that we're vulnerable enough so that others, at least a tight knit community, knows that those are our dreams and our aspirations, and that we allow them to support us.
Get a moment to speak with your younger self. What would you say to her?
Don't stop writing. Um, believe in your writing, believe in yourself. I know that for some time when life got tough, it would either be I'm going to stop writing completely because, like, what's the point? Or I'm going to try to channel everything that I'm feeling through writing. And so I'd say it also gets better.
Do you have any advice for creatives who are listening, for writers who are listening to the show?
I think that when we allow others to like hold our hands and walk us home, and that's something that I read in Stitches by Anne Lamott, which was a gift by one of my writer friends in the writing community. When we're vulnerable enough to share what we're passionate about, and then when we're open enough to receive support, I think magical and wondrous things happen. And I've seen that with my community, but also, like, I don't think there's a single student of mine that I haven't told that I'm working on a project or that I'm a writer and that my dream is to become a traditionally published writer. And it's astounding how supportive they are, and they've become like my biggest cheerleader. And they've told us, Nicole, you can't give up. It's those little things. But none of that would have happened had I not been vulnerable enough to share what my dreams are.
Hmm. So it sounds like let people know what you're working on so that they can provide you with the support you need
Yeah,
to get through the next leg of the journey. What do you want your legacy to be?
that's a hard question. I think that for my daughters and even my students and any of my future readers, that whatever I did with passion. I think that's it.
That's beautiful. What's next for you?
I am writing a new novel in verse. I don't have a title for it yet, but I'm really excited about it because I feel like um this might be that one thing that I've written so far where setting really, really, really becomes character.
Mhm.
And it's about a girl who learns that she's been living by the mountains, but she doesn't belong to the mountains. And so it's this whole idea of the mountains in the DR and the valleys in the Dominican Republic, and are like, does that change who we are? And so it's just I'm having fun with it because normally that's how I begin a project. I plot to the T, and then I just forget about it. And I give myself permission to just flow.
Is there anything that you would like to share with our listeners that we haven't discussed or touched on?
I think I mentioned it, but it was just once and like in passing. But I do want to say that there was a moment when, and this was last year, when I had received so many rejections in my pursuit to find an agent that I had just like I had given up. And I know that being a Dominican author living in the Dominican Republic, um, I feel that it makes more sense for me, even like strategically, to be traditionally published. And so there was a moment where I was just I had given up and I had started the indie publishing. And I don't want to discredit. I'm just saying that this is what I was going to start because I didn't believe in myself enough. And I had set a date to publish on February 27th, which is our Dominican Independence Day. And I think it was about like 3 weeks before that date that I got an email from who now reps me. So I got an email from an agent who is now representing me. And so that was definitely a milestone. But after that, after we went on submission, like the amount of rejection that I started receiving again almost ended it for me again, like my belief as a writer. And so I guess that what I'm trying to say is that every time that we're faced with rejection or even a negative review, I for me what's working is focusing on the yeses and focusing on the support that I know I'm receiving. And I know that it's very easy to say it, but when I've fallen back and I've realized, Nicole, in 5 years, you've written one, two, three books, two are on submission, you have an agent. It's like that data that somehow is meaningful. I think it's important that we believe in what we have accomplished and that we see it and that we give it the importance because it is important. And then we can wallow about the rejections.
That's such a valid point, Nicole, because we're always thinking about the next, what we're trying to achieve, but we forget what we've already accomplished. So celebrating the wins, it keeps us going. It's just a
Yeah,
reminder. I just want to say thank you, Nicole. I'm so grateful that you are on the show sharing your experience. I truly know that it's going to help others.
thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. I hope you left feeling inspired and energized to follow your own path with purpose and creativity. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and until next time, keep creating, keep dreaming, and keep living your purpose.